apparently one of the trickiest things about designing a watch is the date implementation. I've always wondered why that's tricky, because really there's only two obvious places to put the date, preferably at 4:30 and failing that at 1:30. Every other position is kind of stupid. Let me tell you why. Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. My last video was a raging success, got me lots and lots of new subscribers and lots of positive comments. So how better to follow that up than with a video almost designed to annoy people and make them go away. But bear with me, I'm actually totally serious about this. I'm not totally tone deaf. I know full well that this is really controversial. I know full well that many of you are going to disagree with me. I'm not putting this out to generate hate views. I genuinely think we should change our minds on where dates go on watches, because I think that what the habits that we have are dumb and result in watches that are less than they could be. And let me start by saying why I think, if you're going to implement a date, what do I think it should be? Well, what are the criteria I assess it against? And there's really three. The first is that it should be thoughtful. It shouldn't be plumped down anywhere that just kind of was convenient or out of habit. You really should think about what is the best possible place to put this date for the watch to be all that it can be. And that really brings me to the second point of saying the date placement must not mess with anything, must not cost me anything that I would have had if you hadn't have put that date there. So if the cost of putting a date on the dial is that I lose an index or I lose an Arabic or I get one of those things mangled, then you failed. I should not lose anything through the addition of a small date window. And the final thing is, putting that date window in really shouldn't make the rest of the watch look like shit, which a lot of date implementations do. Now, the first thing is, I should say I am talking about date windows here. If you want to go for like pointer dates or other sorts of ways of indication, that's a whole different kettle of fish. I'll talk about that some other day. So I'm talking here about date windows. Okay, so the first thing is, let's talk about the implementation of a date window so that it doesn't cost me anything. Now, watch dials are a really interesting thing in that, on one hand, there's a lot of space in that tiny little dial, but secondly, that space is precious to some things, because things like the Arabics and the indexes, particularly if you've got Arabics and you've got 1, 3, 6, and 9, 12, 3, 6, and 9, they're kind of committed. They can only go in certain places, and they should get priority because they can't move around unless you're doing like a crazy hours or something. But yeah, they're pretty locked in place, so they should get priority. And things like a 3 or a 6 are wonderful opportunities for the watchmaker to show off, to give us. They're great shapes. They're great things to look at. If you sticking a date in costs me the opportunity to have a really wonderful playful 3 or a 6, then I don't want the date. I want the really good dial. And but the thing is, I don't have to make that compromise. There is lots of other room on the dial. I can put the date in a lot of other places and keep my 3 and my 6. So why would I put it in that place where the numbers have to be? I would say that putting the date at the 3 or the 6 position would be tolerable if you dragged it in far enough that it no longer interfered with the Arabic or the indice. That probably only works for indices though. Having an Arabic number next to an Arabic number, one the date, one the 3 or the 6, would kind of look a bit messy. So I would accept someone having the date at the 3 or the 6 o'clock position where they've dragged it in far enough that it doesn't mess with the indice and where it's just an indice and not a number. Okay, now theoretically, you could also continue around, by the way, and put the date at the 9 or the 12. Putting it at the 12 is tricky. Some watches can do it. It can get a bit crowded up there because that's where your logo is going to be as well. But it might work if you've got an awful lot going on downstairs, and sort of giving it some equal weight on the dial. So I could see a case for putting it at the 12 or putting it in that orientation, but well below. However, it is still, as I say, it's very rare, and only if it's a very complicated watch is that likely to work. Oh, putting it over on the 9 is possible. It actually is done in a couple of very rare circumstances. By and large, I've not recommended it because there's no real need to step that far away from normal practice, and let's just keep things under control and not go completely to crazy town. Okay, so let's assume you've made your decision to put the date in its proper place, either the 4:30 or the 1:30. Now, how do you do that without destroying the rest of the watch? The first is easy and obvious to anyone who's watched me before. Under absolutely no circumstances do you put an anal wart, otherwise known as a cyclops or magnifier, over the top of it. They are ugly, disgusting, and they stop the watch from working properly because every time you go to look at it, you'll suddenly find it's covered in vomit. So keep those cyclopses away, and we're 99% of the way to having a half decent date implementation. After that, what you've got to do is you're going to have some kind of hole in the dial face, and you want to make that hole look pretty. And you do that by either paying attention to the border and making sure that it matches in color, tone, style, and overall quality whatever you put on whatever you put into the indices or the Arabics. If that is wildly different, if one is quite nice looking and one is quite cheap looking, if one has one kind of finish and the other has another kind of finish, it just doesn't work. You have to put as much thought into what is that date border going to look like as you would any other indice or Arabic on the dial. If you don't go for a border and you're just going to punch a hole straight through, that is fine. That can look gorgeous as well. Just do it well. Dimple it down a little bit so that the date kind of vanishes into a well. Don't make it a harsh, scrappy kind of cutoff. Don't, under any circumstances, let the edge of the hole be seen, like a black dial and then this silver kind of dial in base and interior. Don't let that happen. Just treat it with care. Treat it with some respect. Rule 3 in integrating your date into the dial is if you are going to color match, it's got to be perfect. It's really annoying. It's really off-putting having 2 different shades of blue, 2 different shades of red, 2 different shades of green. If you can't get it exactly right, simply stick with the traditional black or white. So any color will go okay with the absence of color that is black or white. But if you've gone for like an emerald green and you don't nail the emerald green on the dial wheel and they're a little bit out, that's really bad. I've got a watch that does that. Lovely blue dial, lovely blue date wheel, not the same blue, and it's kind of jarring, which is really unfortunate because apart from that, I adore that watch. But that date, that really is a bit of an eyesore. That's probably actually the reason why most big watch companies don't try and color match their dials and their date wheels, because with all the different dial variations you've got, you would then have to have corresponding skews for every movement that then matches that and only that dial. It's way easier for them to say, I've got 150 different dial colors, but still only 2 movement skews, the black one and the white one. My final point, and this is probably the least important, but I love it because when they do it right, it shows an attention to detail. Orient the numbers so that they're straight. Orient the numbers so that when you look down at the dial, the number is looking straight back at you, not at an angle like this or like this. That's it's not terrible. It's not the end of the world, but there's a reason why almost no one does skews their Arabics that way at the marker points, because it just looks a bit weird and it's a bit uncomfortable. Just make your dates straight. Like I said, it's not the end of the world if you don't, but it's such a nice thing to do. It really does elevate the watch and make it look much nicer when you've got a nice straight date in a date window that's at the 1:30 or the 4:30. So that's it. That's how I think dates should be implemented. So why, if for me, the date implementation at the 1:30 or the 4:30 is so obviously superior to pretty much anywhere else, then why is it that A, it's really rare, and B, pretty much everyone else would argue against me? In the recent Zenith Chronomaster thing, which was a very successful video for me, thank you very much to everyone who liked that one. There was the date implementation at the 4:30 on the Zenith, which I think is one of the highlights of the watch, was often held up as one of the biggest problems with the watch. And so why is there that mismatch? I think basically habit. I think that's really all it comes down to. I think people have just got used to the idea of seeing the date at the 3 or the 6. That's grown up with the idea that that's where they should be, even though it never really makes any sense. But it doesn't matter because people don't think about these things. Too many people think that their taste is somehow innate, that the way they like things is kind of because that's how they should be, as opposed to that they've been taught that that's what they should like. And I think that's what happens with the 3 o'clock date. I think it makes no sense. I think if I'm trying to look at this as a straight, this is how things should be, the 3 o'clock position that most dates are in is clearly the dumbest place on the dial to put it. And yet it's the place that we routinely place it. And I can only imagine it's habit. It's unthinking, unthoughtful. Of course, that's where it's going to go. Of course, all the infrastructure now has been built around it being there. That's where we see it most of the time. And when it's not there, it's kind of jarring. So what I'd really say is if you do find the idea of a date at the 1:30 or the 4:30 jarring, really interrogate why. And don't give me any of this crap about symmetry or whatever, because it's not symmetrical anyway. Think really hard about what is wrong with a date at 1:30 and 4:30. What are you losing by putting it there? And the answer to that is nothing. You lose nothing. And then what do you gain by putting it there? One, you gain a 3 or a 6. You gain extra indices. What do you gain putting the watch at putting the date window at the 3 or the 6? Nothing. What do you lose? You lose those indices. You lose those markers. So why would you do it? Anyway, that's my take on this. I understand many of you will be different. That's okay. You're allowed to be wrong. You can explain to me how you're wrong down in the comments below, and I'll see you later.